Hey guys, and today I've come to London Electric Cars, and when I say London, we are in the heart of London. I mean, 5 minutes walk that way and I'm at the Houses of Parliament. That's how central we are. And behind me you can see a couple of iconic classic cars, the Beetle and the Land Rover. This is a Series 2 Land Rover, and we're going to find out what they do here, which, as you've probably guessed from the name, is converting these to electric. Whoa, is that blasphemy? We'll find out. We'll talk to Matthew Quitter, the founder of this company, to see what he thinks about that. Also what he does, how he does it, how long he's been doing it, and maybe even why he does it. Plus we're going to go out in this thing and see what it feels like to drive or to be in a classic car that has now been converted to electric. All of that to come right after this.
So you want something sleek and glamorous, and then check out the Jaguar E-Type featured in our launch issue, alongside many other features such as
buying guides, owner's tips, and even how to buy your own first classic car.
Go Classics is about the cars that you relate to, the cars that you've dreamed of, and the cars that you can own, run, and enjoy. At Go Classics, we'll tell you how.
Go Classics is the most exciting car magazine on the shelves today, and it's out now. And you can get one by heading over to goclassics.co.uk, where you can find some of our fantastic limited time subscription offers.
forget about the boring, the pompous, the self-important. If you want something new,
Go Classics!
Hi, I'm Matthew. This is London Electric Cars here in Vauxhall, London. And this is our garage, and these are some of the cars that we're working on. We've got a Ford Anglia, Morris Traveller, a Mini, Bentley, Land Rover, and a Carman Ghia in this garage. So we started in 2017 in a small underground garage, just me, and then slowly grown over the last few years. We're now in under some railway arches in the line from Waterloo to the west coast. We've got 2.5 arches here with a total of 16 cars on site. We're all in various stages of conversion. So we've only done 6 cars, but we've really been focused on the sort of challenge of affordability and also speed. The two are sort of quite closely related. The quicker we can do a conversion, the more affordable it's going to be. And equally, we've been focused on using Nissan Leaf components or salvage components because it's a really good way to bring down the cost. So for example, you've got a Nissan Leaf motor and gearbox here that's due to be going into the Mini to your right. And what we found is that by using salvage components, we can significantly reduce the cost of a conversion. So we start from 30 grand for the sort of the base conversion. At the moment we take, well, it depends. So if we've done the car before, so something like a VW Camper or a Carman Ghia Beetle, you're looking at around 16 weeks. If we haven't done the conversion before, then we have to do an awful lot of R&D to get it, figure out where we're going to put the batteries, how do we make the motor, the gearbox, stuff like that. And then you're looking, 6 months to a year, even longer, depending upon the car and what the customer's looking for.
For example, cars that you may not have worked on, I saw a massive Lincoln Continental in
Yeah.
the other arch. I mean,
Yeah.
that must be a big project.
That's a massive project. That's also has a large amount of restoration in it. So that's something we generally try and avoid because there are better restorers out there, probably cheaper as well, and we really need to focus on the conversion process. But occasionally a customer calls up and offers you a project that you can't really refuse, and the Lincoln's one of those. It's just incredible.
And there's a Healy there as well. And,
Yeah.
and you said, and so you're doing international projects as well, because both of those are going to the UAE.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. We've got the Lincoln came from New Jersey, arrived here. We're going to convert it and then send it to Dubai. We've got a Bentley behind you that's due to go back to Ireland, arrived from Ireland. Well, we're one of the earliest companies to start doing this in an affordable fashion, and consequently, people sort of pretty much from all over the world have gotten in touch to see if we can convert cars. This is a really good example of some of the pressures that cause someone to do a conversion. The customer in this case has 2 daughters who don't want to get into a combustion engine car. This is the love of his life, well, probably apart from his daughters and wife, is the love of his life. He really wants them to be able to enjoy the things he enjoys, and so he wants to convert it. And then you come up against the obstacle of the price. And for how he intends to use it, which, let's face it, it's not going to be driven aggressively, then a Nissan Leaf motor is in this particular situation is absolutely fine. At the end of the day, it's about affordability, and by using Nissan Leaf components, and also by trying to repeat the process as much as possible, we hope to be able to bring down the cost a lot.
Something very interesting that you said there, particularly in light of we're filming this against the backdrop of COP26 that's going on in Glasgow, and a younger generation that's obviously demanding change to the way that we consume fuel and carbon. And I noticed that you're not just working on classic cars, but you're working on new cars as well.
Yeah.
So is that actually what your mainstay might be going forward?
That's
when
difficult.
I say new car, I mean newish cars.
Yeah. Modern classics maybe, and so on. I think it's still too early to tell, really. You can run through the figures. So we've got 40 million vehicles in the UK. We've committed to the Paris Climate Agreement that says that by 2030, or to meet our obligations for that, we're going to halve our CO2 outputs by 2030. And one of the ways that has been identified to do that is to reduce the CO2 emissions from road transport. And to do that, we're going to try and replace half of the cars or vehicles on the road with zero emissions vehicles. There are 40 million vehicles in the UK. To replace half of those with zero emissions vehicles means some 20 million vehicles are about to be removed from the roads, and half of a car's lifetime CO2 output happens during manufacture. And one of the, if we're looking at a society that's based around reuse, recycling, then the idea that I use a 2005 Volvo as my sort of go-to car, for an example, something like a V70 or a V90, one of which we've got out there as well. Leather seats are still good, the air conditioning's still good, the suspension's still good, the electric windows are still good. The whole car is still fine, it's just got an engine in it that's bad. And so to scrap the whole thing and produce a completely new car seems really wasteful. And so what I'm hoping we can do is through the use of salvage components, or at least affordable EV components, and repetition of the process, is we can offer conversions of more modern cars. And certainly we're seeing inquiries that suggest that there's a significant market for that. And at the end of the day, that's really what we're all about, is we want these cars out on the road, being driven. We're not converting the cars for them to be a weekend thing. We want these being used. And certainly the cost that people are paying for them at the moment, I would hope they're being used regularly.
So how do you deal with the whole contentious issue of converting classics? You've got an Aston Healey, for example, next door, which looks in relatively good nick. It's got a working engine in it. But a lot of people, they take umbrage at ripping out the engine of a car and putting an electric motor in.
Sure. Look, at the end of the day, we're a customer brings us a car and they pay the money and we do what they want us to do. It's an entirely personal decision. And it's the classic car, ownership one. When you modify any classic car, there's a whole group of people who tell you you've done something wrong. There's another group who tell you it's the best thing ever. And then there's another group who say, it's your car, you can do whatever on earth you want to do to it. Whether or not a car has historical integrity is a really personal decision. The cars that I would maybe be uncomfortable converting are probably different from the cars that you would be uncomfortable converting. Well, for me, it's the Aston Martins, but that's because I grew up around one, and sitting in the back seat and hearing the engine burble around the back is a very personal experience for me. Whereas I think things like some of the 80s Ferraris, which I don't find particularly attractive. Again, I don't really see the point in converting. Cars like the Bentley here, you get in that and you're like, this should have been converted a long time ago. The performance characteristics of electric
And
motors.
this is the thing with like cars like the Morris Minor that you're converting. The original performance, I mean, it barely would have reached 60 miles an hour.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, again, the Morris Minor for some people has a very evocative exhaust note, and then some people think that without that, it's not really a Morris Minor. And there are other people who just think that classic cars are something you shouldn't touch. So this is a 24 kilowatt hour Nissan Leaf battery pack. We've taken the lid off for you to see. So you can see the individual modules all stacked up. We basically dismantle one of these, reconfigure it. You can see various battery boxes in various guises to your right, and then repackage them to go in a car. And so it actually ends up being, in theory, quite simple. Obviously, the intricacies to get it to all work nicely and to be an easy installation is the work that we've been having to do over the last few years. But yeah, we're really, when people, particularly classic car enthusiasts, and as I mentioned, I'm part of a classic car club, and initially they were sort of really standoffish about the components and so on, whereas they're the people who would stick their head under your bonnet in a second. It's about making it approachable, and one of the ways you make it approachable is by making it appear relatively simple. And in many ways, large conversions are very similar to remote control cars. And it's this sort of, at its fundamental levels, it's the same concepts. So you still have to match to a degree. Again, it depends what the customer's looking for. If they're not bothered doing 0 to 60 in 6 seconds, and they don't really need to be able to do over 60 miles an hour, then the Nissan Leaf is a perfectly effective power unit. Something like a Land Rover, it's almost identical in performance to a TD5. Obviously, you have full torque from 0 RPM. You have to look at the environment that people are using their cars in these days, and also either ask the customer, or they've arrived at that point already, whereby they're a little pragmatic about how the car is used. You take London, for example, the average speed limit in most of central London these days is 20 miles an hour. So you can drive around in a Bentley with a Nissan Leaf motor or a Tesla motor. What does it make difference? If one car can do 0 to 60 in 4 seconds and the other might not even get to 60, if 20 miles an hour is your speed limit, then it's a leveler. So I think part of what we're seeing with the electric car revolution is people reevaluating how they use their vehicles. And I hope, and certainly for our pricing, how we'd like our pricing to go based upon mileage, that you use with your car, range. We're hoping that people start to say, well, the average vehicle journey in central London is under 10 miles, and I think the average journey in the country, as a whole, is around 10 miles. So if you're able to get people to realise that they actually use their cars mostly for short journeys, then this fixation on range hopefully will dissipate. So we are London Electric Cars. We're on Instagram at London Electric Cars. Our website is londonelectriccars.com. We've got a contact us form on our webpage, or drop us a message through social media.
Okay, so Matthew, what are we in? I mean, this looks like an old Land Rover, but it's not making the normal engine noises that I would have expected it to make.
It's a 1969 Series 2A Land Rover. It would originally have had a 2.25 petrol engine in it, and that's been replaced by an HP EVS AC50 and 18 kilowatt hours of batteries, hence why it's not making any noise at all.
Yeah. And how long did this one take to put together?
So this was the second car I converted after the Morris Minor. I made a bit of a mistake with this in that I agreed to do the restoration on it as well.
Oh, right.
Which is something I guess is a learning experience. And being an old Land Rover, there was a lot of restoration to do on it. And there's still a lot of restoration to do on it, but it drives now, so we've handed it back to the customer, and if he wants to do that, that's up to him. But yeah, now it's used as a sort of daily run around. You can see where we pull off in second gear. It keeps up with London traffic quite nicely. It's still got a full clutch and gearbox, so I can change gears into third.
So actually, how does that work with an electric car? Because obviously old modern electric cars don't have manual gearboxes, but you still have that here.
Yeah, so It's a function of the size of the electric motor that you want to install, and that's then a function of the price that the customer's looking to pay, and also how invasive you want the conversion to be, and also what the customer's looking for. And with a lot of classic cars, we find that customers are actually rather keen to keep the gearbox. And obviously it makes for a slightly more affordable conversion, because you're then not having to find some way of replacing the gearbox. So basically, the less you do to a car, the more affordable it is to convert.
But how does that work in terms of driving? Because I mean, surely the electric motor has a constant torque, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, but it still has it still has a sort of torque, a vague torque curve. And if you match the electric motor performance quite closely to the electric one, then you end up driving it in a rather similar fashion. Obviously, because you've got full torque from 0 RPM, you don't use, say, first gear in the way that you might do previously. And when it comes to pulling away from the lights, you just put your foot on the accelerator and off you go. And if you're in second gear, you accelerate quite quickly, and if you're in third gear, you don't. So your gear selector becomes almost like a torque selector, which I guess it is in a petrol car too, but you just have the fact that you can't let the motor stall.
So in this one, you don't use the clutch apart from when you're actually changing the gear.
Yeah, exactly. So when we came to a stop there, I didn't have to use the clutch. Pull away without the clutch. When there's tension in the gearbox, so when you're actually at speed, then you can use the clutch to change gears. When it comes to stopping, starting, then you don't really need to worry about it, because you can't stall an electric motor like you would a petrol motor. So driving around like this in central London, again, the average speed limit is 20 miles an hour, so I'm not going to be racing anyone particularly. And so you kind of drive it like an automatic. You leave it in one gear and just sort of cruise around. If I'm, say, racing a taxi off the lights or something for lane position, then I might pull away in second. And then when we're up to speed, I might change to third.
But what other changes did you have to make? I mean, I noticed that inside it all looks the same, right down to all those little levers that Land Rovers have. Apart from this digital box over here.
Yeah, and that's something that's quite common for our conversions. Is the customers really want to retain as much of the original feel of the car as they can, and that normally starts with the interior. Obviously, every customer is slightly different. Some want big display, some want no display. The Carmen gear that you saw, the customer's really been explicit that there's to be no sign that it's conversion at all. And if there's a problem with any, if we want to give him a warning light, then that's done through the alternator light, which obviously is no longer relevant.
Right.
And then a proper fault display is in the boot. Whereas this guy, he just wanted, whatever was simple for us to install and get out the door.
So this is telling you what, how much range is available?
Yeah, you've got battery voltages, you've got amps that you're using, you've got volts of the actual battery pack. So there are lots of little, things to help you drive rate, basically.
And charging these, you can charge them at any place like you would normally charge a Leaf. You can just do that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So it has a J1772 port. So you can plug it into one of these chargers on the side of the road, or you can also charge it at home. So yeah, it basically has the same port that you'd find in a Nissan Leaf.
And I'm sure that they're all different, but for example, in the case of this particular car, how long does it take to charge, and what's the sort of range on it?
So this has 18 kilowatt hours. It'll do probably 35 miles. Again, the owner lives in Chelsea, works in our space. His average journey is 5 or 6 miles, so he's charging once a week.
All right.
In terms of charging time, it has a 3.3 kilowatt charger in it, so you're looking 4 or 5 hours.
And obviously you've got all the levers and everything on here. Is this still all-wheel drive?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we've got videos of him towing shipping containers around with it.
Oh wow.
So I mean, the electric motors really suit sort of industrial applications where you need full torque from 0 RPM. So rather than having to use clutch control to really bring up the power, in this you just you select your gear and you put the foot down. Yeah.
What would you say were the key difference in the sensation of driving this car compared to how it was to how it is now?
Obviously you don't have the sound of the engine, and you're not having to work to accommodate the RPM range of the engine. It's so much quieter. If we were in it wouldn't be too bad at sort of driving around at the speeds we're driving around in. But the engine makes noise, and if you were doing, say, 40 miles an hour, we'd be struggling to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And obviously, we're also not, exuding fumes.
Yeah.
So it's quieter, and it's also not stinking everyone out as we drive past them, which is really the most significant aspect. Because we're driving down narrow London streets.
Yeah, we're in the middle of London, which is normally, this is a ULEZ zone, and a congestion zone, so they don't like, gas guzzling, dirty cars around here, do they? And this might look like it is, but it isn't.
No, exactly. And then it's exempt from ULEZ, it's exempt from congestion charge, it's exempt from road tax. So it becomes very cheap to run, which is again one of the pleasures. And filling it up with electricity is also really, really cheap. Particularly when you start to think you can do it from a home supply, overnight when you're paying really low rates.
Is this car heavier than it was, or is it?
It's about the same weight.
Okay.
It doesn't have the biggest battery pack in it. It's probably actually a little bit lighter, in fact. It's the batteries that add the most weight. And if you think when we take out the petrol engines from these, they're normally the one in this was around 150 kilos. The Lincoln one was 400 kilos.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of weight coming out. And then you look at the size of the car and proportionally how much weight you're adding. So a Mini, for example, it's difficult not to put quite a lot of weight into the car just because it's so small. Basically, the bigger the car gets, proportionally, the more weight it can handle from a battery pack. And that's why you see modern electric cars are large. We get, can you do 300 miles in a Land Rover? And the reality is no, not really. 200 miles is realistically the maximum you can fit into.
The max limit, based on what you're using at the moment. But that's likely to change, though, isn't it, going forward?
I certainly hope so. Every week there's some wonderful new innovation coming into the electric car world. I know from certain companies that we've been speaking to, people are working on 1 megawatt charging, which is I believe is a faster energy transfer rate than petrol, than petrol. But at the same time, until that's actually, I think the plan is for that to appear in Formula E next season. So they actually have effectively pit stops where they recharge. But for that to actually,
that'll be interesting.
It'll be amazing, and but equally utterly terrifying. That's potentially 1,000 amps that you're charging at.
So actually, that's a good point. It takes us back to whilst we actually circulate Parliament Square right now in a Land Rover. This is the sort of contradictions of what we're doing. We're in an old Land Rover in the heart of Britain, but it's electrified. It's extraordinary. This is the past meets the future, and all kinds of radical stuff is going on here.
It's fun at the end of the day. That's the sort of what seems to get people the most is that you get into one of these cars and they're fun, and then you've lost a lot of the people say you're losing the character, but you're also losing an awful lot of the trouble. And also
these cars are easy to maintain and run as well.
And they work, so when I get into these in the morning, they start first time every time. Doesn't matter what the weather's like, you turn the switch. Cold weather might reduce your range a bit, but you don't have any of this get in, hope that you're pull on the choke. And cross your fingers you're going to get to work in the morning.
So going back to what I was about to ask you was what are the dangers of working on these cars?
So like any contained energy system, if that energy is allowed to escape in an uncontrolled way, or in ways and routes that you're not happy with, then it's dangerous. That being said, there is a degree of unfamiliarity with electric systems that makes people incredibly paranoid around them, and I hope as the experience is gained and as society becomes more comfortable with it, they will realize it's a very approachable technology. And I, the proof is in the pudding that I'm able to start a small car company and grow it without the support of billions of dollars like a major company have. And I mentioned it earlier. It's a lot more complicated. It's a lot more. There are more systems and safety systems and so on a car like this compared to a remote control car. But at the end of the day, and I say this to young people who are keen to get into EVs and work and stuff. A electric skateboard, an electric bike, a remote control car. They're all using exactly the same ideas, which is batteries, a controller, and a motor. Once you get into this side of the stuff, you've got safety stuff just to manage, make sure that nothing particularly bad is going on. But ultimately, it's a very approachable, simple system. And people have been converting electric cars to electric for a long time, because at the end of the day, all you actually need is batteries, motor, and a controller. And that controller can be as simple as a big variable resistor that something is swiped back and forth across it. So they can be implemented in a very, very simple way. Obviously, you don't get into modern OEMs and they're getting very complicated, but at its heart, it's a very simple technology.
So,
in terms of danger, because that was your original question, like everything, you need to approach it with a clear idea of what you're looking to achieve. You need to have proper safety processes in place. The most important of which is what I always teach my guys, is slow down and think about what you're doing before you do it. Have a voltmeter, because the voltmeter is your friend, and check everything before you do it. And then there are other sort of secondary things, like I mentioned. You don't have two people working on an HV system at the same time. But ultimately, it's about gaining experience, and I think we'll find it's no more dangerous or less dangerous than working on a petrol system.
So final question then. I mean, you did earlier mention some of the cars that you wouldn't want to convert.
Yeah.
What is a car that, aside from the ones that you're working on at the moment, that you would really love to try and convert?
I've got a wonderfully weird one. The Aston Martin Lagonda.
Hang on, you just said you weren't going to do Aston Martin.
Oh, no, so I meant the DVs. No,
right,
but, okay, so the Lagonda...
So the Lagonda is like the wedgie one?
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
which was originally
awesome.
meant to be the spaceship kind of super tech. And unfortunately, it was a disaster for them. It was way too before its time. I love that car too. Incredible. And I just think that I'd love to get my hands on one of them. Part of the reason I got into this was I have a little Triumph Spitfire. And driving that is just an absolute joy, except when you come to a stop and your fumes catch up with you and you're then sitting looking really cool, but your eyes are watering a little bit, and it's stinky. And then you look at cars like that when they're converted to electric, and all of a sudden you get this complete silence, and it's serene and tranquil, and they're wonderful.
I'll tell you what, that would be really interesting. I'd love to see an electrified Lagonda. That would be very, very cool. I hope somebody brings you one soon.
Me too.
Matthew, thanks so much for this. Thanks for taking me around this incredible Land Rover, and good luck with what you're doing.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
So you want something sleek and glamorous, and then check out the Jaguar E-Type featured in our launch issue, alongside many other features such as
buying guides, owner's tips, and even how to buy your own first classic car.
Go Classics is about the cars that you relate to, the cars that you've dreamed of, and the cars that you can own, run, and enjoy. At Go Classics, we'll tell you how.
Go Classics is the most exciting car magazine on the shelves today, and it's out now. And you can get one by heading over to goclassics.co.uk, where you can find some of our fantastic limited time subscription offers.
forget about the boring, the pompous, the self-important. If you want something new,
Go Classics!